Hey, welcome to the VET S.O.S podcast. Remember, don't drown in the sea of transition. Grab the VET S.O.S lifeline. VET S.O.S is brought to you by the Who You Know Network and proud members of the Parade Deck community. Today, we're sitting down with Nick Padlo. He is going to tell us about not only his transition, but the great work that he's doing with his organization, Sophros Recovery. Really looking forward to hearing the work that they're doing and how they're helping our community, and they could potentially help you. So I'm back in the saddle here with my battle buddy, Keith. Keith, how you doing today?
I'm doing well. It's been a little bit of a break, but it is awesome to be back and happy to be back. Back in the saddle, ready for the battle.
Yeah, so I had to report you from, AWOL.
Hey.
A little payback for when you reported me AWOL.
Well, I mean, I at least had a valid reason.
Yeah, I mean, surgery's not valid. All right. So we got Nick Padlo. He is a combat veteran, successful entrepreneur dedicated to making a difference in the lives of others. A graduate of West Point and Stanford MBA program. He served as an officer in the U.S. Army during Operation Enduring Freedom and Operation Iraqi Freedom, earning the Bronze Star Medal and Combat Action Badge. As the CEO of Sophros Recovery, an award-winning addiction treatment center, Nick combines his leadership experience and personal recovery journey to advocate for accessible, evidence-based mental health and addiction services for veterans. How you doing today, Nick?
Doing good. How about you guys?
Not too bad. Not too bad at all. Just trying to get in the swing of things. And, we're excited to be in season 5 and rocking and rolling. So let's go ahead and start with your transition out of the military. How'd that whole process go?
Sure. So when I was in, it was 2003 to 2008. So, most of our time was deployed, or at least, revolving around deployments. You were either getting ready downrange or you were coming back. Right. And so for me, I was doing my second tour, this one in Iraq. I think that was the 15-month one. And, I was kind of trying to figure out what I wanted to do, what life looked like after the military. And, some of my buddies had gone to do an MBA program, and it seemed like a great solution for, those of us that didn't know what we wanted to do when we grew up, right? More school. And that doesn't have to be like on the officer side. It's the same thing on the enlisted side. It's like, oh, I'm going to go back to school, right? I had a bunch of my guys do that as well. And I think that was a good thing. I mean, I think for, I know myself, I didn't really have any transition assistance coming out of the Army. I don't remember any, and maybe there's more now. I hope there is. But it was kind of oh, you're getting out? All right, well, here's, go turn in all your equipment and, go see the doctor. Right. It's just like very basic. And I kind of looked at this MBA program as like a 2-year reset for me, to be able to say, all right, I have 2 years to really figure out what I want to do in this world. And, I think for a while, for me, one of the biggest challenges that I had, and I'll get into this a little bit later too, but was really just like figuring out who I was when I got out. It was less about what I wanted to do and more about like, who am I now? Right. Because I was only in for, if you count, West Point as kind of Army. I was only in for 5 years, but I'd been wearing the uniform since I was 18, right? So 18 to 28, I'd never been an adult out of the Army. And so what does that look like? Who am I? What do I care about? How do I continue to feel like I have a meaningful life of service, outside the military? I think that was my biggest challenge. It goes from this concept of like, duty, honor, country, and the Army leadership, the Army values and all that stuff to like, I'm going to go work at a company selling things, or managing people that sell things, for consumption. It was a very weird thing to me. And I think, I never really found the value in, managing an income statement and optimizing profit. And it just didn't fit with me. Right. I could do it. I was like relatively talented. But really, I think that was the biggest thing that I struggled with getting out, was like, I don't have the close friends that I used to have, the same type of friends. And I probably never will, to be honest. I said my Army friends are still my best friends. And then also what do I care about? What do I want to do? Who am I?
You hit on so many things that impact our community, and I love every time I talk to someone who went to one of the academies. It makes me giggle because we had one captain who was a West Point grad, and anytime he would get antsy, we'd pick on him a little bit and talk about our fraternity days and stuff like that from college, and he'd go, "Well, our experience is different."
For sure.
But yeah, the identity, and that's a great point though. Going to West Point, wearing the uniform at 18, you never were an adult outside of the Army, and so I mean that's got to be a really interesting thing to look at, especially even for our enlisted side. You enlisted 17, 18, you never got a chance to be an adult, and now you're out of uniform and you have to learn this whole adult thing, and it can be challenging, man. Those are some great points.
And I think what's hard for people to understand is, take someone on the enlisted side that served for 4 years, right? So 18 to 22. And we see them now and they're 35 years old and they still don't know where they fit into the world, right? And I think from someone looking from the outside, they say, well, that was only 4 years. Like, you've been an adult for 13 more years after that. Like, why haven't you gotten it, right? And I think people underestimate two things. One, the extent to which we integrate someone into this way of living in the military, right? It's very much, I mean, at West Point, they have a saying, it's like the definition of leather. If the fresh skin of an animal is clean and divested of all hair, fat, and other extraneous matter, it's immersed in a dilute solution of tannic acid, a chemical combination ensues, the gelatinous tissue, oh, I messed it up. I would have gotten hazed. It's impervious to and insoluble in water. But, basically it's an allegory for how we put people through this process and we change everything about them and we get rid of all the old ways. And then as a result, you come out and you're tough and you're strong. As a result, you also come out and you're really part of this thing. And so that's the first thing I think people underestimate. And then the second is just, these are the formative years of your life, right? There's a lot that happens, I think, in the brain. I'm sure, from a neuroscience standpoint, they'd have something to say about it. There's a lot that happens in the brain between 18 and 22. And combine that with how much you're integrated into this thing. And unless you unlearn that, it's almost like, I wouldn't say it's necessarily a trauma by itself, but it's like a trauma in the sense that your body and your mind are kind of stuck in that mode. And unless you do something to unstick it, you stay there.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. And now I can't get the image of, boot camp making us all hard leather. Yeah. But, Keith, I've always said that, like 21 to 26 is when we really start to figure out who we are as a leader and that type of thing. And, that lines up with like the E5 type, range and stuff like that. And, so I think that whole period there is such a period of learning and growth and figuring out who we are anyway. And if you compound that with the transition, I mean, it's really got to be a confusing part.
Yeah, I mean, I'm literally watching my middle son go through it right now. He just got out of the Coast Guard and he's going the education route, using his GI Bill to go back to school. And thankfully, he took a stab at a degree plan and he seems to be sticking with it. He seems to be loving it. But whereas my youngest son, who didn't serve at all, he's still trying to figure out what in the world do I want to be when I grow up, kind of thing. And but yeah, I mean, you hit the nail on the head. I was the same way. Joined at 17. Retired 22 years later, 39 years old, never been an adult civilian a single day of my life. And yeah, and I think therein lies the identity crisis too, because, we have this sense of service. And I went into the customer service world for a year and a half. When I first got out, I was miserable. I was absolutely miserable. Loved working with the people I worked with, just like we did in uniform, right? But that sense of, I just got to make money for the company, and it's profit margins and all that kind of stuff. It drove me nuts. And so many of us service members, we end up falling back into something that is where you're part of something bigger than yourself, whether it's helping other veterans or just helping the community at large and all that kind of stuff. So yeah. And so I'm really kind of excited to hear more about the Sophros Recovery Program. What can you tell us about that, Nick?
Yeah, well, I think it's useful if I tell you how I got there first.
All right.
So, you know, I was running a business in pet cremation, of all things, for about 5 years, and it was cool. Like we managed to make it, you know, mission driven in the sense that we were trying to make the worst day for a pet owner a little easier, and I could wrap my head around that. Like that was something that I could say, okay, that's a mission that's valuable. But at the same time, I still think I was struggling with who I was, and so, you know, sometime between 2008 and 2015, you know, I started to lean more and more on alcohol to solve my problems. You know, it was, it's something that so many of us in the Army are very familiar with, right? We know that as one of our battle buddies, right? And, you know, for a long time, it was a good relationship that I had with it. You know, it brought fun, camaraderie, all those things that we know from it. But for some of us, you know, myself included, at some point that relationship turns bad and it's no longer a healthy relationship. And so, you know, I ended up, I got a divorce. There were some things in my life that like weren't going as planned. And I had this battle buddy, I had this friend, right, that had helped me through some other small things, and now some big things were happening. And so I leaned more on that. And then before I knew it, I was in deep, you know. I mean, I'm sure it was a long process. It wasn't like an overnight thing that I went from being a, you know, healthy drinker to being an unhealthy drinker, but nonetheless, there I was. And so, you know, I had gotten involved with some drugs as well. And then my mental health started to suffer. And so I was running this business that was otherwise successful. And I was, you know, drinking every day, right? I was, you know, at first it was like, oh, let me have a couple to take the edge off, you know, at the end of a long day. And then that just got worse and worse. And it got to the point where, you know, I wasn't working much at all. I had a healthy business, so I could hide it. The business kind of ran itself. And so, you know, for a long time I hid it, but that was bad because it didn't cause me to get any help, right? Because I was able to stay under the radar a little bit until I wasn't. And so, you know, I had gotten to the point where, you know, I was ready to end my life. Like I was done. Thankfully in 2018, I was, you know, in a room in Dallas, and I was trying to decide if that was going to be my last day. And I, you know, went to the computer and Googled rehabs, you know, didn't know what to do. I had no idea what to do, right? What I was looking for. I mean, knowing what I know about the addiction treatment industry now, it was a roll of the dice. Like there are some really nefarious providers out there. And like, you know, I just happened to get really lucky and found a great place. And I liked it so much that I went twice that year, meaning I didn't quite get it the first time. But that's okay. A lot of us don't, right?
Had to do some more research, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you know the word. Yeah. So I went out and I did some more research, and turns out I still had a problem. And so after the second time, I actually moved to Cambodia for 3 months, and just lived at a temple there, practicing mindfulness and yoga for 8 hours a day. Wow. Which for an Army guy to go do some Eastern, you know, frou-frou hippie stuff was crazy. But it was exactly what I needed, right? And I think that holds true for so many of us. Like that thing that we resist, you know, is probably what we need the most. And you know, it really helped me learn how to like live in the present moment and not judge it, and like just be okay with it and figure out the next steps. And so, you know, I like I said, I went through that process and came back from Cambodia, and I was like, well, what do I do now, right? What's the next step? I'm a successful CEO, also a very unsuccessful CEO, right? Because the business did well and I had investors and the investors made money. I was also an alcoholic who was a CEO. So like, I don't know if that's a good one or a terrible one, probably a little bit of both, right? But I came back and I was like, what if I were to come up with something that could help other people who were struggling with the same kind of stuff? You know, I don't know if I was thinking this at the time, but that would, one, I can tell you what's wrong with it and what we could do better. I can tell you what we're doing right. And it gives me that mission and that we were talking about earlier, right? And I don't know if that was all in my head at the time, but it turned out that way. And so came back to Jacksonville and started Sophros Recovery.
It's a fantastic journey. And
yeah,
I think one that I know Keith and I can both relate to. And I mean, my liver should have gotten its own retirement award when I left the Army, but definitely should have gotten a PCS award from Korea. But yeah, it's definitely a serious problem. But that's just a fantastic journey, man. I don't know how you go from running a pet cremation business to essentially being a monk for 3 months to coming back and starting this organization. That's just amazing. Yeah. So what's the offering? Like what do you offer through this recovery program?
Yeah. So when I looked at this whole like landscape of addiction and mental health treatment, you have detox, right? Which is where someone needs medical assistance getting off of a drug, essentially. And it's to keep you safe and make sure you're still learning stuff, but that's the medical side. Then you've got residential treatment, which is rehab, which we all know. And that's, you go somewhere, you live there for 30 days and you come back and you're magically cured. Well, it doesn't really work that way. But that's what I thought it was anyway, when I first got in. And then the thing about those levels of care is, and there's some like business reasons why, but a lot of investment has gone into those. And so, like I mentioned, there are some that are not good, but there are some that are very good, right? Just by nature of the industry, it takes, a lot of millions of dollars to build a residential treatment center, right? And so with that comes some pretty smart people that are doing it right. Where we sit is one step after that. And so we do what's called partial hospitalization and intensive outpatient. And essentially what that means is you're with us full day or half day, but you go live at home or you live at sober living or whatever. But what I love about this level of care is that you're having to deal with life on life's terms while also getting treatment, which is pretty cool, right? I didn't relapse at rehab, right? Why? Because I was in rehab, but people that come to us, and I have just so much respect for them to be able to do this, especially if they don't go to residential, is like they have to leave treatment, drive home, drive by probably 3 liquor stores and 6 gas stations, right? They've got to decide not to pick up. They got to go home. They got to have a, fight with their spouse or get yelled at by their boss or whatever, decide not to go back out, right? And then come into treatment the next day. And so it's that process of like having to go through these tough decisions while dealing, while in treatment and being able to process that when you come back. So, I left treatment yesterday and I really wanted to pick up. Like I went and sat in the parking lot at the liquor store and I didn't. I worked these tools. I worked these, these things that we're learning and I didn't use. And now we're going to come back. We're going to talk about how next time maybe we go down a different street, whatever we got to do. Right. Or I did use yesterday. I didn't make it. All right. How do we do things differently? Right. And so it's this kind of like, it's like a live fire exercise every day, right? Where you're really getting live repetitions and real training while you're in treatment. And so what we do is we provide group therapy, individual therapy, doctor medical support for 10 to 14 weeks while we kind of step people down and integrate a little less treatment, a little more life over the course of that time. Hopefully by the time they're done, then now they can stay successful by working their own program. They're not healed when they leave us either. It's like 30 days, you're not healed. 10 to 14 weeks, you're not healed. That's like bad news for people, right? They think but this is a chronic disease. And so you have to continue. I mean, I have to work a program, right? I can't not work a program in addition to what I'm doing. I've got to work my program or I don't stay sober. Yeah. So that's what we do. Just overall.
Yeah. And I love something you touched on. Well, first of all, to all of our listeners, I mean, if you're out there struggling right now, you know if you are. I've been in those. There's sometimes you're like, oh, I'm in a good place now, but 2 years ago you're like, I can't put the damn drink down, and it comes in waves and all that kind of stuff. So if you're listening, it's you know, everybody, oh, it's a sign. I used to even be the one to joke, you know, oh, anybody can quit drinking, but it takes a real man to face cirrhosis of the liver. And, and it's no, it takes a real man to go get help, or a real woman. It takes a real person, right? That's the hardest thing you have to do, is be able to say, I need help. But something you touched on, and I think a lot of folks may be nervous about too, is when you relapse, not if necessarily, but when, because we're, anybody who's in recovery is capable of it, right? I've always heard, I'm not one more day from my last drink. I'm one day closer to my next one. But all that to say, if it does happen, you're welcomed back, right? There's no judgment, but people are afraid of that, right? Like, oh my God, I relapsed. I went back out. I had a drink. I took a drug, whatever it might be. And they don't come back sometimes because of that. And that's fatal. That's terminal.
What's crazy is that, and like, I think it is worth repeating what you just said, because, even me, who knows everything about this industry, there was a time when I was struggling with relapse, and I didn't want to come in. I didn't want to come back in, right? I didn't want to tell anybody. I wanted to manage it on my own, right? I can get through this. I know all the things, right? Yeah, okay, I know I'm up here, right? Mm-hmm. But like, the opposite of addiction is connection, is what we always say. And like, our secrets keep us sick, all these other taglines that we say in the rooms, right? But they all are so important, like, it's this ego that we have. We always say people have, it's like we're an egomaniac with an inferiority complex, because we feel really terrible about ourselves, but we still don't want to come in and tell people because we're afraid of what people will think about us. Well, that's ego, right? Because that's like me thinking about me. Like, I don't want to come back in because I don't want to be judged, but I'm already judging myself, right? And what I found was, I had resisted kind of coming back in and being open and honest, and like getting a new white chip, which is what we give on day one, like starting my day count over, all these things that, it's going to hurt the business. It's going to, like, all these things that I had in my head that were going to happen when I came back in. Like, I don't know, like, I didn't know if they were going to like play bells and like shame, like in my head, that's what it was, even though I knew. And what happened? Everyone like claps and like hugs you and like, glad you're back. Thanks for being, and then I had support. People are texting me, checking in. Hey, Nick, just wanted to see how you're doing, man. Thinking about you, and like these constant little reminders of like, it's what I would do if one of my friends relapsed, right? Now, why did I think it was different for me? Who knows, right? But it's not, if you're listening, it's not different for you either. Like, everybody's, no matter who you are, you're not that important. Like, everybody's just going to be there with open arms. So,
yeah. Absolutely.
And that is so true for so many aspects of our lives too, because even with the transition process, we continue to run into people who are like trying to do it themselves, and there's so many resources available to help them, not do it for them, but help them through it. And it's when we start talking recovery, no matter what you're struggling with, I continue to do research in all kinds of areas, including anger management. And, it's one of those things where, you're always going to be fighting certain things and trying to find ways to handle it. It's kind of always going to be a part of you, right? If you're an alcoholic, you're an alcoholic. There's no magic fairy dust or anything that's going to change that. And, same with anger management. I look at it like the Incredible Hulk. You're not going to like me when I'm angry, and you try to not turn green. You try to stay normal, and some days are just worse than others, and you need to talk to somebody and reset. And so to me, I think that's just great that even as the CEO of a recovery organization, you're open to admit that you still continue to struggle, and you go through a lot of the same things that we all go through, trying to convince yourself that you can handle it and this and that. And realizing that it's all in your head, and, you need that camaraderie, you need that team, you need that support. And, together we're so much stronger.
Yeah, absolutely. And you mentioned, this concept of constant work. I mean, I almost look at it like kind of like weeds, right? The weeds that we have in our, metaphorical garden or yard or whatever, so to speak. Like for some of us, it's alcohol and drugs. For others, it's anger. For others, it's whatever. And we can cut that, right? We can stop drinking. We can stop, we can change our behaviors. But at some point, you got to get down to the root, right? And that's really what the work within the rooms of AA or Smart Recovery or Sophros is all about, is like, let's start to figure out what conditions lead us to act in ways that we don't like, right? And we work on those conditions, right? So, I'm not concerned about whether or not I'm going to go out and have a drink today. Like, I'm good for today. I've got a meeting after that. I'm good for today, right? So why am I going to a meeting? Right? Well, the reason I'm going to a meeting is to work on myself, right? To work on those things that will make me a better person. Because if I don't keep moving forward, it's kind of like a treadmill, right? It's just going to take me backwards. And so I don't want to just not drink. I want to stay really far away from that drink, right? I want 10 things to be between me and that drink so that it's not an option. And like when I stop working my program, it goes from 10 things to 8 things to 6 things. And then it's like, hopefully I'm paying enough attention and I'm being mindful enough to notice that I'm a little closer. And then I just take steps further, right? It's kind of like anger. If you're it's almost like the difference between a volcano and a teapot, right? If you look at a volcano, it's like all this pressure builds up, pressure, and then boom, right? Whereas like with a teapot, it's like constantly releasing some of that so that there's no pressure building. Well, we have to do the same thing, right? We've got to like communicate and talk and like all these things that we don't want to do. But when we do that, we start to live differently. And I think that's like, my goal is to be able to live differently and to be able to live to be the best version of myself, not just a sober version, but really something worth being.
Yeah. And the culture of our uniform services, right? Alcohol is a part of it, right? Even our dining ins, the balls, right? The grog and in the Marine Corps ball. Holy crap. You ever been to one of those? That's off the chain. Right. And so it's part of the culture. And so, most people, they can imbibe and a drink of alcohol and be just fine. But yeah, and like you said, we all have weeds, right? We're all addicted to something. It may not be as detrimental as some of the things that some of us others are addicted to, but at the end of the day, go get help. And I almost want to bring it back full circle, right? We talked about when we get out, right? We have this sense of duty and honor and country and all this kind of good stuff. And quite frankly, again, if anybody's listening and you're struggling with something, I'm not just saying alcohol, I'm not even just saying drugs. If you're struggling with something, go get help, because that's where you're going to start to find some of that sense of community again. In the case of like the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous or one of these recovery groups like Sophros, like we're talking about today, a lot of vets are in those programs because alcohol is so prevalent in our society. So you're going to probably find federal veterans anyway, but if not, you're still going to find brothers and sisters in a different way. And you're going to find a whole new community of support that, you're going to bond with folks. Nick, this has been absolutely amazing. We are coming up on time, which breaks my heart. But with that said, real quick, back to the program. What does it cost? How do people sign up? How do people who maybe either know someone or they themselves need to get involved in this program? How can they reach out? How can they get involved?
Yeah. So if you just go online to sophrosrecovery.com, SOP, it's on the screen, sophrosrecovery.com, just call that main number and we will point you in the right direction. We've got locations in Jacksonville and Tampa. We've got virtual services throughout Florida. But if you're somewhere else and you need help, we'll find you the right place for you. I don't care. So, just reach out and make that call, right? It doesn't mean that you're going to be committed to an institution. If you make the call, make the call, talk to somebody. And if you think we're full of, whatever, by the time you get done with the call, okay, fine. Nothing hurt, right? 5 minutes. But just make the call, and there are resources out there, whether it's us or somebody else. But a good treatment center will never just say, hey, we're not the right place for you, or you're not insured here, or whatever. Like they will then take up the fight for you. And so that's what we will do, is we'll find somewhere. We're covered. We're in network with TRICARE, and we're in the VA CCN. And so, hopefully for vets, the cost is super minimal. We also do some scholarships and stuff like that. So we're in all the other commercial insurances and all that stuff too. So, hopefully you're covered. If not, maybe we can work something for you. And if not, we'll find you a place.
That's awesome. And and again, if you're listening, what better place than to go one that's being run by a fellow veteran, and being run amongst the veteran community. So if you're in Florida, but even if you're nationwide, reach out to Nick, connect, get the help you need, or hey, maybe you have a heart to just help out. I'm sure Nick would gladly take any assistance that they can get as well. So with that said, folks, it has been amazing. It's so great for me to be back. I kind of dusted off the chops a little bit. But with that said, on behalf of the VET S.O.S family, we'd like to thank everyone for joining us today. VET S.O.S is growing and spreading its wings. You can follow us on all social media platforms. Make sure to check out all 3 of our shows and to follow and subscribe to us wherever you get your podcasts from. We're on YouTube, Reach Across America Radio, and the Parade Deck, and all your other favorite podcast platforms. So remember, don't drown in the sea of transition. Grab the VET S.O.S Lifeline.